Hi, everybody. We're live. The NFL meeting will start in a few seconds because I heard somebody talking back there. And after this, that'll run out things for today. But this is quite important because of COVID-19, you know. And so any moment now, I expect things will get rolling. Um, this Freeman Remote is the host for this one. Oh, let me tweet this out for those who are going to be joining us. Oh boy.
Are you warming up?
Huh?
You warming up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You need anything? You okay? You need anything? You okay? Okay. Um, so there's two issues. There's COVID-19 and there's also, well, hitting, right? Hitting. Just two things. So, and let's see where they are here. Not yet. Ready. Okay. Trying to post this on Facebook so that people can see it. Going to sharing debugger. And you would say, what's sharing debugger? Sharing debugger is a device that allows you to make sure that your images, there it is. It's ready. Ha ha ha.
Join with your camera off until prompted to turn your camera and mic on when your name is called. So let's begin now with Jeff Miller.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our annual health and safety update. A little bit different this year, of course. We wish you were here with us, but we'll do our best to answer your questions and talk a little bit about the year. What an unusual season it's been, but at the same time, a productive and collaborative journey. Just a moment to make sure that we thank all the people involved for getting us to this place. No victory laps yet. We are looking forward to a terrific game on Sunday, and there's a lot of work that leads into it. But before we get to that, thank you, of course, to the collaboration with our friends at the Players Association, the players themselves, coaches, any number of club officials, the medical and public health support that we've relied on throughout this year as we've adapted protocols and then refined them and evolved them as we've learned more and more. Thanks to our contact tracing teams who have been remarkable 24/7 throughout the season, and to the clubs for their work with our contact tracers to make sure that we're able to keep our players, coaches, and staff as safe as possible. This season wouldn't have been possible without one specific principle in mind, and that was the health and safety of everybody involved was going to come before any other concerns, competitive or otherwise. And I think we've abided that principle throughout the season, and as a result, we're here in Tampa, looking forward to a terrific game on Sunday. Thankfully, we've been able to play 256 games as well as the postseason to this point, on track. And importantly to us, and Dr. Sills will talk about this in a minute, been able to learn a great deal about COVID, been able to learn a great deal about how our protocols work, how our protocols needed to evolve, and how our protocols may be able to be applied into public health generally. It was an important point for us and for our Players Association both to continue to learn and to share those learnings more publicly. So with all of that as background and leading into the Super Bowl, let me turn it over to Dr. Sills and then to Dawn Aponte for their perspectives on the season before we get into some questions. So Alan, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate the chance to visit with you. I want to start by echoing something that Jeff said. A tremendous word of thanks to all of our partners throughout the season, particularly to my colleague, Dr. Tom Mayer, and the medical advisors at the NFL Players Association, to all of the many medical advisors and people that consulted with us and helped us along the way, and most especially to the players, coaches, and staff who did the hard work every single day to keep themselves safe. I also have to tip my cap to our infection control officers, the club athletic trainers, and the medical staffs who have never worked harder than they have this season. They're always incredibly busy, and this year they basically tripled that workload and stepped up and did that to allow us to get through this season. So my hat is off to all of them. It's been an incredible journey, and I am really proud to have shared this with them along the way. I think there have been a couple of sentinel moments for us and sentinel changes that have allowed us to get to this point. Jeff mentioned that we had to continue to evolve our protocols. And I think you've heard us say many times the phrase flexible and adaptable, that we had to continue to take what we were learning and change and grow with that. And we did that throughout the season. But there were a couple of, I think, particular signpost events. One was our evolution of our definition of high-risk close contacts. After the team outbreak in September, we recognized that simply saying 6 feet of distance and 15 minutes cumulative contact was not going to be adequate. We were going to see transmission that did not meet those standards, and we had to account for that. And that's the basis of the paper that we published last week with the CDC, was evolving this definition of high-risk close contacts. We learned very clearly that all contacts are not created equal. All close contacts are not created equal. And it was a better understanding of how transmission was really occurring that allowed us to evolve that definition. I think a second important event for us was the implementation of the point-of-care PCR test. Early in our experience this year, we're using point-of-care antigen testing, but as we implemented the point-of-care PCR test, it allowed us to get a rapid, accurate result that tracked along with our standard laboratory test, which made detection of new cases possible at a much earlier phase than what we had seen previously. And that was really important for us, particularly in some of the situations where we had an evolving outbreak. And then I think the implementation of the intensive protocol. As we saw the effect of the intensive protocol and how it greatly diminished high-risk close contacts, we realized that applying that across the board, and not just when we started to see tests in a particular team, would be a very valuable strategy. And clearly that implementation allowed us to see our cases go down and our close contacts go down at a time when the numbers in the country were trending in the exact opposite direction. So as we look to wrap this, and where we stand now, we ended up with 262 cases among players, 463 COVID cases among other personnel, coaches, and staff. And our overall test positivity rate from August the 1st through the end of January was 0.08%. And that's well below the corresponding positivity rate in the country as a whole. It was also below the positivity rate in almost all of our markets. And that leads me to make a statement that I think is something that all of us take pride in, and that is that we feel that our club facilities truly were some of the safest possible locations in those communities. The uniform application of our protocols, the efforts of risk mitigation that everyone undertook made them a safer environment. And as a result, we had fewer cases than what would have been expected in the population if they were simply living in the community. So let me close by saying that this has been a really gratifying journey. For me as a physician, the most gratifying thing, in addition to the collaboration that I mentioned, is the chance to use what we've learned to benefit the larger public health community. Just like our publication last week with the CDC and with some other publications you'll see over the next few weeks, we're going to take our NFL experience and benefit many others outside the world of sports and across the country and really across the world. And I think it's that application of our data and our findings that I find really gratifying as a physician and is one of, to me, the most significant achievements of this season. Dawn?
Thanks, Alan. Good afternoon. So, this year has been quite different from any other from a football perspective, from a logistical and operational standpoint, both on and off the field. As you've heard repeatedly, there has been tremendous collaborative efforts, communication, and really an overall commitment to operating safely and responsibly throughout the season. As you heard from Alan, we evolved our protocols along the way. We continue to share our learnings and data. The clubs have been amazing in terms of remaining flexible and adaptable throughout the season to get us to this point. And, this week is, again, another example of how clubs have remained flexible, and this is the first time that we have a participating team flying into the host city the day before the game and will fly out immediately after. And that's, again, following and adhering to best practices from a health and safety standpoint. So we look forward to Sunday, and again, just appreciate everyone's efforts along the way to getting us to this point. So thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Two other quick points before we jump into questions. One is I wanted to make sure that we highlight the 7,500 vaccinated healthcare workers who are going to join us at the game on Sunday. It is truly an honor for us to be able to invite these first responders and healthcare workers to the game, obviously to say thanks, a debt of gratitude that we all owe as Americans, and certainly here at the NFL. And if this is a small way in which we can express that gratitude, then it is certainly our pleasure to be able to do so. And secondly, of course, to highlight the importance of vaccinations. These 7,500 people all will have been vaccinated, like Dr. Sills here sitting next to me. And that is hopefully a terrific message for us to be able to send. Changing subjects. Usually we use this forum to talk a lot about concussion and some of the other injuries. Those things remain equally important to us. Obviously, the current events of the day with regard to COVID are going to take most people's attention most of the time. But our work at the NFL doesn't stop there. The concussion work continues. As related to this season specifically, pleased to say we were down about 5% in regular season games as it relates to concussion. That's the third consecutive year we've been in what we call our new normal, which is about 25% down in concussions from where we were in the previous years. This is progress. This is not success. We will continue to implement our concussion reduction strategy, again, focused on rules, the implementation of those rules and changes as necessary, refining how our players practice. And then lastly, of course, continued innovation in helmets, which is something that we continue to put a fair amount of resource behind and are currently running another helmet challenge, which we will announce winners on in a few months' time as that program continues to grow. We continue to be optimistic that there are changes to be made in equipment and that we can continue to stimulate those. So more on injuries as a general matter, as we move closer to combine and our engineers and medical advisors and the NFLPA get a chance to study some of these statistics. But we will continue to focus on that over the course of the next few months. So with that, I can stop, and Brian, maybe we can go to some questions.
Yes, as a reminder, use the raise hand function, and you'll experience a quick reload. Please join with your camera off until you're prompted to turn your camera and microphone on when I call your name. Let's begin now with Lindsay Jones.
Hi, everybody. I have a question for Dr. Sills and for Dawn. They're kind of in the same vein here. Knowing that just because we've made it to the Super Bowl here this week, that this is hardly a finish line when it comes to COVID. So I guess for Dr. Sills, are there any medical protocols that you think are going to persist related to COVID in 2021? And then are there any medical learnings that you guys have come up with this year through this process that will persist in your decision-making process on all health and safety decisions moving forward? And then for Dawn, I have a similar question about football operations and football logistics, and what were maybe some of the changes that went into effect for 2021 that you could see sticking? Is that things like roster flexibility, injured reserve rules, practice squad expansion? So thank you, guys.
Well, for the first part of your question, I think that for the current time, our protocols will remain intact with regard to the basic principles that we've seen to this point. We're still doing testing at our club facilities. We do have an off-season protocol that our clubs, once they've finished their seasons, have been under, and so we'll continue to use that protocol. Just like we've done throughout the season, we'll continue to modify it as conditions change. And I think it's really hard to look too far down the road. You know, right now, if we all think about how much has changed, how much we've learned in the last 6 months, very hard to project where we'll be in the next 6 months. So we're really taking this one step at a time, but we do have a current protocol for how the clubs should operate their facilities over the coming few weeks with regard to players, testing, strength and conditioning, and so forth. And that protocol will remain in place for the time being. As far as takeaway lessons, I mean, infectious disease issues are always going to be with us in sports medicine, even once COVID is hopefully a distant memory. So I think we have learned a lot, again, about safety within our team facilities and about screening and about what we can do to eliminate all types of infections. One of the side benefits, if you want to call it, is we had almost no influenza cases this year. And that's not true just in the NFL, that's in medicine in general. And I think that's a reflection, again, of many of these mitigation strategies. So I think that is something that will be a learning. On the flip side, as you know, there was a lot of alterations to our schedule. We had a very different off season. We had a very different training camp and preseason with a longer ramp up and a very different structure. So as Jeff mentioned, one of the things that we'll be doing over the coming weeks and months is really diving into that data, understanding the relationship between those changes in schedule and what injuries we did see, and trying to see what learnings we can take from this very, very unique year. Dawn?
Yep. Hi, Lindsay. To your question regarding, some of the things that we did learn through 2020 from a football operations standpoint, in addition to several of the things that you did reference, which is the roster flexibility, practice squad numbers, injured reserve, all of those things will definitely be reviewed and discussed with the competition committee and with the clubs. There are also other things that I would say in terms of the game day environment, the number of personnel on the sidelines, bench area, travel logistics, and, just everything that the clubs went through this year in terms of virtual learning. And, we will be reviewing, I think, many of those aspects from start to finish to see what we can take away that really would be beneficial for the longer term.
Okay, next question will come from Ben Volin, Boston Globe.
Here we are. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us today. My question's about players and coaches and everyone getting vaccinated. I know you've said many times that the NFL is not going to jump the line. It's going to happen within the course of society, I guess. Will players be incumbent upon getting vaccinated on their own? Will the NFL set up a vaccination program when the time has come? And do you anticipate being vaccinated being a mandatory part of playing next year?
You want to start? You want me to start?
Yeah, I think, Ben, those are all active conversations that we'll continue to have together with the Players Association and their medical advisors. Let's make no mistake about it. Both us and the Players Association medical leadership believe very strongly in vaccinations. We believe it's safe. We believe it's effective. We believe it's imperative as a way forward out of this pandemic. So we'll continue to have those conversations and work very closely together. I think you've already seen the NFL doing what we can to support vaccination efforts. There are several of our stadiums which are already being used as vaccination centers. And I had the chance just this morning, I was in Atlanta and I was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium and I saw firsthand the scores of people that were coming in there to be vaccinated. I think that's a terrific way that we as a league are already supporting the vaccination efforts. But as it becomes our turn, if you will, I think that we will certainly have those conversations and we will make sure, whether it's players, coaches, staff, everyone that's eligible and able to be vaccinated has that opportunity. Anything you want to add, Jeff?
No, maybe touch on the real quickly on the education with Dr. Hildreth and others.
Yeah, and we have done already a fair number of educational efforts and we'll continue to do that. As Jeff mentioned, we've worked with Dr. James Hildreth, for example, who's the president of Meharry Medical College down in Nashville, a real strong voice and advocate for vaccinations. We've worked together to do some PSA work there. I know we're working together with some other professional sports leagues with the Ad Council to support vaccination. So you'll see us have a lot more to say and do, I think, about vaccinations in the coming weeks and months as it becomes more of our turn.
Next question comes from Mark Mask.
Thank you very much. Did some of the issues that you had with the contact tracing with the Chiefs over the weekend, are you confident that that was contained and that incident won't produce any further issues for you this week?
Well, I think, Mark, we are always monitoring these situations, but we had a very good understanding of the exposures. And so we did feel very good about being able to draw a tight circle around who might have been exposed and dealing with those through our protocol. So again, in medicine, we always say never never, never say always. And so I think we have to just continue to monitor that situation. But in that instance that you referenced, the club took very prompt and direct action. Our contact tracing team was on site and was able to get a very clear understanding of the exposures. And so at this point, we feel like we're in a good position with that, and we'll just continue to monitor it. I think it also points out, though, that our high-risk close contact definition is something that we apply across the board, and it really doesn't matter who's affected or the timing of it. It's going to be all adjudicated in the same manner.
Okay, next up will be Tom Pelissero.
Hi, Dr. Sills. Dr. Fauci said a couple of months ago that he thought by the end of summer would be about the time where you could have full stadiums again. It's also been pretty well documented that the rate of vaccinations has lagged somewhat behind the initial projections. So I'm wondering, based upon what you know about the broader health picture, as well as, of course, the NFL piece of it, what in your mind, if any, is the greatest barrier to the NFL having full stadiums when the 2021 season begins?
Well, Tom, I sure hope he's right. I'd love for him to be right, because that means we can all go back to the things that we enjoy in addition to watching NFL football games in person. But I think we all know on the healthcare side that we've got continued work to do on vaccine education and convincing people about not only the safety, but the efficacy of the vaccines. I personally believe that we're going to see the supplies increase substantially. I know there's a tremendous amount of work that's going into that, but I think the data is going to be very clear that vaccinated individuals are going to be much safer. Already, if you look back at the outcomes from the vaccine trials, you can see that 75,000 people vaccinated, no deaths in that group, and no one that was hospitalized other than for a short period of time, and that was only a few hundred individuals. So these are amazing achievements. These vaccines are incredibly safe. They're amazingly effective. And again, I think we want to do all we can to support that effort. So I think we'll see that as a major focus of the public health community as large. And again, we in the NFL want to do all we can to support it. That's part of the reason, as Jeff mentioned, that we have these 7,500 vaccinated healthcare workers here in Tampa, because we want to highlight how important we think it is, while we also thank them for their service over the course of the past year.
Next question will come from here in Tampa, Justin Schechter, WFLA.
Hey, Dr. Sills, 2 questions on the topic of masks. From the data you were able to observe over the past season, did mask wearing at the 32 teams' facilities help contain the spread of the virus? And second, was the NFL involved in discussions with our mayor, Jane Casser, putting in place this outdoor mask ordinance? As you know, the state of Florida does not have a mandate like other states. So was the NFL involved in getting this mask requirement for fans out at the Super Bowl events leading up to the big game?
Well, I'm going to speak to the first question, and I'm going to let my colleague who works in governmental affairs and communications take part 2. But the answer to part 1 is unequivocally yes. Masks work, and they are probably the most important risk mitigation strategy. I think that's one of the lessons that came out of our paper with the CDC last week. People focus a lot on that we test every day when they focus on our contact tracing devices, and both of those elements were important for us. But the one thing that really prevented transmission was mask use and consistent mask use. I think that we have to reference back something we've talked about a lot, that 90% is not a passing grade. You have to be at 100%. But when you do that, when everyone wears a mask and does so consistently, and when you think about ventilation and open air environments and those other points that we mentioned in our paper, you can really block transmission. And so our data shows, it's not our belief, our data shows that that's the key element to preventing transmission. And it's why I've said repeatedly that preventing transmission is not complicated. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. We understand exactly what it takes. It just means that we have to execute it every single day by every person. And I go back to something that Jeff and Dawn both spoke about, and that's that teamwork aspect. You had every single person in that team environment, whether it's player, coach, staff member, who adhered to those protocols all the way through for 7 months. That's really hard to do, but that is the discipline and that's the dedication that all our teams showed. And by the way, it wasn't just the teams that were having the best seasons. Even those teams that were struggling still adhered to those protocols and kept themselves and their opponents safe. So clearly masks were a big part of that. Jeff, I'm going to
it's been a terrific collaborative process with local, state, and federal health officials and elected officials throughout the course of the season in every community. As we've thought through how it is we can bring fans back to the stadium safely, as we've thought through how to enforce our protocols, whether that be for our players at practice, at games, and as I mentioned, opening up our stadium. We had more than 1.2 million fans return to the stadiums in more than 100 games this season, with no negative case clusters coming out of those games. And so the masking that Alan mentioned, the social distancing, the pod concepts to keep our fans safe have had an effect. And we've certainly worked closely with the folks here in Tampa throughout the course of Super Bowl as we look to get fans back into the stadium and to do so safely. We've shared, even at the seat-by-seat level with federal officials as well as state and local officials, our manifests to show how it is we would keep people safe. Not just the 7,500 vaccinated healthcare workers, but the 14,500 and the several thousand other people who are going to be in that stadium on Sunday. And so I think without those conversations with those officials at all those different levels, we wouldn't have gotten to this place. And it's an important collaboration and one that I'm sure will benefit, has benefited the public health of everybody who's been in the stadium.
We're going to stay here local with Sarah from Spectrum.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Sills, you had mentioned that you think we're going to be able to use what you learned during this season regarding COVID-19 to benefit the larger health community. Are there particular lessons that you've taken away that you think could be put to use out in the community?
Well, as I mentioned before, the thrust of our paper last week was that the evolved definition of high-risk close contacts was really important. That is, if you go in and look at transmission, it's not just about 6 feet and 15 minutes. There are other factors, the ventilation, the mask use, the time of exposure, and the distance. All of those factors have to be considered. And I think our data also showed that targeted isolation of those individuals is really important. So that, again, is not something that's NFL or pro sports specific. I think those lessons apply across the board. It's also critically important, though, to avoid in-person meetings, to have as much activity out of doors as possible, to have prompt symptom reported, to have screenings, to not have people taking meals together. All of those were the elements that were part of our protocol that clearly had the biggest impact. So again, I think the exciting part of that work is that's not resource intensive. Those are lessons that can be applied by youth sports or high school sports or businesses or schools or places of entertainment of worship, that they're not sports specific. And that, to me, is the really key and informative part of the data. And I think we have to emphasize, too, we had a unique ability, and part of the reason I think the CDC was interested in partnering with us, we essentially followed 32 different communities longitudinally over a 7-month period with daily testing, with uniform protocols, and with this contact tracing data. So that's a really unique data set from a medical standpoint to understand transmission, to understand how to block transmission, and to understand behavior. And so those were the things that allowed us to make those observations. But I do think those observations will have a lot of impact well beyond the NFL.
We'll go with 2 more questions. John Crick.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yeah. We hear you, Tom.
Hi, Al. This is for Alan or Jeff if you want to weigh in as well. Rugby Australia has come down with protocols, I'm sure, for concussion. I'm sure you've heard about. Symptoms abate, and it's 18 days for youths and teens and kids. Given what happened in last month, Taysom Hill came back to practice after a Sunday concussion on Wednesday. And of course, Patrick Mahomes last week took all the reps at practice Wednesday, a week ago, just 4 days after his concussion. We've talked about this over the years. I'm wondering if the NFL is considering putting in a minimum at this point.
Well, let me answer that a couple ways, John. First of all, I think all of us in the field who deal with concussion recognize it's a very heterogeneous injury. This is not one specific injury. So there are a lot of different mechanisms. There are also a lot of different recovery trajectories. And there's a saying in the field that when you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. I mean, each one really can be unique and has its own features. So I think that's step one to understand. Secondly, everyone across the world agrees that you should go through a graduated return to play where you're monitoring symptoms and where you're slowly increasing activity, because we all recognize that symptoms disappear at varying rates, and sometimes symptoms will disappear and reemerge when someone starts to ramp up that activity. So the whole goal of the return to play process is the brain fully healed? We have to understand that we don't have a blood test or a scan that tells us that. Right now, our best way to assess as clinicians if the brain is healed is, do we see symptoms reemerge as someone ramps up that activity? And so that's why we haven't put a particular timestamp on it, is because people do recover at different rates. And we have to acknowledge that. Some people will recover faster than others just because of their own individual physiology, their own concussion history, as well as the severity of the injury. And that's not that different, for example, from a sprained ankle, a knee ligament sprain, or something like that. People recover at different rates. The other thing I would point out to you is it's a bit of a mistake to say so-and-so, whether the illustrations you cited or others, came back to practice 3 days, 4 days later. Part of the return to participation protocol is to participate in non-contact activities. So a player might be on the practice field doing some of the drills, but not taking contact. And that is still one of the fairly early stages of our return to play protocol. Doesn't mean they've had final clearance. Final clearance from the concussion means not only have they gone through all of those stages, but they've also taken contact or simulated contact. They've been cleared by an independent neurospecialist and the team physician, as well as the team neuropsychologist, that testing has come back to baseline. So sometimes I think people misunderstand. If they see a player back on the practice field, they think, wow, he's been cleared from the concussion. Just because he's on the practice field doesn't mean he's been cleared. Also, we look at that data every year. We look very carefully at every concussion case. Our head, neck, and spine committee reviews this. They look at the time to return. They look at those instances where there's been another concussion injury and the time interval to that injury, and make adjustments to the protocol. And we'll do that same thing this offseason as well.
Okay, last question will come from Zennie.
Thank you very much, everyone. This is for the panel as a whole. Has anyone at the league or the league itself had dialogue with the Biden administration? My firm's on the White House press list. We have a dizzying number of executive orders and directives that come down my email on a daily basis. And also, that's my first question. My second question is, given that the World Health Organization on November 5th issued a report stating that it definitively did not know where the virus came from, and yet we have mutations, do you have a scenario plan for how to deal with what is a policy bucking bronco, if you will? Thank you.
You want to take the second and then I'll finish on the first?
Yeah, I would say that we have looked at the genomic epidemiology and the genomic makeup of all of our positive cases going back a number of months now, which means that we're looking at the exact genetic fingerprint of each positive case in the NFL, whether it's a player, coach, or staff member. So to date, we've not seen any of those variants that have been discussed, but we're certainly still vigilant about that. But I think the important lesson there for our data and for what's being found around the world is it's still many or all of the same mitigation strategies that are important. And so we'll continue to monitor that data. We'll continue to stay in regular contact with public health authorities. We do have those conversations regularly. I can speak to one part of the first part of your question. I have spoken with members of the White House task force. We've done so throughout the season. We've also had regular discussions with the CDC, with the FDA, with a variety of infectious disease and public health experts. So all of these decisions are things that we're making jointly, and we're taking all of those inputs. We also communicate regularly with the other professional sports leagues, not only in North America, but around the world. So it's been a very collaborative effort, and we'll continue to monitor and track that very carefully.
Thank you.
Zennie, not much more to add to what Alan said. It's part of our responsibility to speak regularly with governmental officials, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, whether it be this administration or others, whether it be the White House, the CDC, the NIH, or any other governmental institutions, because we need to benefit from the best thinking of the most people who have the best insight and perspective as to how to deal with what we're dealing with. This was an unusual year. This is one we're not looking to replicate. Let's be straight about that. We're hoping next year we can return to normal. But in the meanwhile, we did what I think was responsible, which is that we found the best experts, whether they be inside the government or outside of the government, and relied upon them to help us through this season. And it's only through listening and learning and evolving and adapting that we were able to get to this point. I will finish by saying we have several more days ahead of us. The season is not over. We have one really big game we're looking forward to on Sunday, but our work continues. And hopefully we're going to get there in a safe and responsible fashion as we've played this season.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Jeff, Dr. Don, and session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, folks, that rounds out the day. Oh, there's me. That rounds out the day. And you heard it from the league right there regarding how it's handling the virus. And going forward, I have the impression that what the league has been doing is, while effective, it's on a, and they can't help this. I don't know who can. It's on an incremental basis. It has to look at incremental planning because it's changing so much, and there's all these unknowns. Dr. Sills, however, did say something I thought that was quite good news, and that he hasn't seen a variant among all of the thousands of cases they've had within the league, and that's great. That's great. It's just that, as a policy maker, and a policy operator, you have to always be aware. You always have to be thinking the unthinkable in a situation like this, because you don't know where it came from. And I don't care what anyone says, we don't know where this is going. We know where you want it to go, right? And that's where effective planning and budgeting come in. But it's a tough nut to crack. I'm glad that the NFL is in constant collaboration with, well, not just the White House, but state and local governments and other sports leagues to really get a handle on how to properly handle the situation. Because in doing that, if you have that kind of flow, I call it a Delphi technique, where you're, well, it's not a, Delphi technique is not a term I invented. It is an actual technique in terms of information gathering. But if you're going to ride a bucking bronco of this complexity, you need to have that many tentacles of information gathering apparatus, which is a really fancy way of saying people talking to people on a constant basis out there and active. So, there we go. Subscribe to Zennie62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com, and that ends this broadcast. Thank you.